A very good morning to you all. Welcome to Sunrise Daily. I'm Chamberlain. So,
good morning and welcome to another new week. I'm Ayo Makinde.
Welcome back. I'm Malco Ogun Yusuf.
I think let's just watch this report, Chamberlain. Something very, very interesting about it. Okay, it's not ready, but it's something that happened in Bauchi. And I think it's very, very interesting for us to talk about it, especially now that children are resuming school. It's something that happened in Bauchi. Let's watch.
A painful reality still stares everyone in the face. The story of a 6-year-old girl whose genital organs were maimed for money ritual. A soft drink bottle believed to contain parts of the genitalia of this little girl. It was found alongside other exhibits in the ritualist den during a police raid. This evidence is what the police have of the dastardly act as the ritualist escaped. Not so lucky is the 19-year-old Abdulkader Wada, who the police say is the principal suspect. He and his co-conspirator, Ademo Abdul Rauf, also arrested 2 weeks ago, perpetrated the crime that has deprived the girl of her femininity, caused her severe pains, and left the family devastated.
We interrogated him, and he confessed to the crime. There is a gray area between him and Abdul Rauf, a 19-year-old, the first suspect that we started arresting. The first suspect alleged that Abdul Qadir Wada Halodu is the one that cut off the genital part of the victim. During interrogation, Abdul Qadir Wada Halodu confessed to us that they conspired together, cut off her genital part. The 2 knives they used during perpetrating this act is here paraded.
The suspect recalls how they carried out the act.
Daga baya shigo da farko cewa yana yanka ta, ni kuma na dauko ka ce baran iya yanka ta ba. Da na ce baran iya yanka ta ba, shine ya zaro kansa bayan ya daga hannunta ya ga hannunta ya shika. Shine yanke mata.
Most of the suspects also paraded here are very young people, a trend the police say is assuming a disturbing progression. Hajira Aliyu, Channels Television News.
Well, it's something that is definitely gruesome and perhaps even tasteless for a Monday morning. But why is this of interest this morning? Students are resuming. And what kind of protection have we given them hitherto before COVID-19? And now that COVID-19 is in place, what vulnerabilities are there for them? Yeah, we continue to talk about the fact that COVID-19 isn't so serious with children. But don't forget that just October last year, Lagos State reported 181 students in one school. And there was one of them who was 14 years old. And a good number of them, about that age, average age now, all resuming school today. What preparations have we made for them on that one? And then what vulnerabilities are there for them for other things that we are not paying attention to right now? A lot of attention is on COVID-19. But then what other protections are we preparing or have we prepared for them, especially as far as this matter is concerned? Now, we have talked about FGM for so many years, and then this is still happening, though a crime. I don't even know how to begin to talk about this. You saw the face of the parents, and you saw how devastated the man was. What's happening to the mom now, only God knows. I don't know. Mark, what do you say?
Well, Ayo, it's the reason why we decided to start a Monday morning with this. There is a choice of things that happened over the weekend, from kidnapping. Some of them are some good news. In some states, we got some pretty good news coming in. Don't ask me for the life of me what they are. But yes, if you do look through the news, you will see some good news coming in from some states. However, the ones that usually strike you the most, the ones that hold your attention the most, are oftentimes the gruesome stories, the sad stories. And we brought this one out because we believe that there can be hope. It is a story that can end well. It has not started well. It is hard for anyone to comprehend what sort of crime this is, because you find young people increasingly getting into crime, and crime of a more dangerous and gruesome nature, one that continues to tear at the heart of our shared humanity. And when you see those type of crimes, we as a people have to sit and ask ourselves, you know, deeper questions. How are we getting to this point? The young people do not value the life of a young girl, and they said that, you know, it is okay to mutilate her genital area because they want to make money or whatever it is that they want to make. So, I mean, that presents a deeper question. You can see the confusion of the mother. She's in so much grief, she cannot even understand, she cannot comprehend the crime. I mean, the father is in agony. You can see the confusion around them. And I just picture in my mind, what is that young girl going through? I mean, who has she offended to be able to experience such a crime at such a tender age? But I do know that modern medicine has indeed improved so much that there can be hope for that young girl. This is why we also ask the deeper questions as to what are we going to do about, you know, about the future of our teeming youth who are beginning to, you know, who are increasingly being lured to crimes like this. You talked about schools reopening. Thankfully, schools are reopening today. We continue to pray for protection while we, observe some for the children who will be going back to school today, and hoping that that will be sufficient to keep them safe, at least health-wise, whilst they're in school. However, there will be thousands more, if not millions, who will not be going to school of any kind, who will not be going to any sort of educational area, whose lives on a daily basis are wasting, who are born into families that have been torn apart or families that do not exist at all, who have absolutely no hope for the future. What are we going to do for those children? Because if they are in their millions, and we're doing nothing about raising them properly or getting them gainfully engaged, increasingly we will continue to see crimes like this. So I think that there is a lot of food for thought this wonderful Monday morning. And it's something that I'm hoping will tide us into the week, while we also plead and, call the attention of the state government or whoever it is, well-meaning people, to the to the plight of that 6-year-old who has not hurt anybody, but has now had her life, almost made meaningless because of the crime that has been committed against her. I'm hoping that people, well-meaning people, would see that report this morning and reach out and see the best that can be done to give that girl and her family hope this morning. Gentlemen.
Well, yes, I mean, it's, I don't know, is it good or bad now? That's how much faith we can have to rely on well-meaning people. That's just how it is, because there's so many institutional voids, safeguards that are not there, that are supposed to work together to ensure that these kind of things don't happen. If you listen to the police authorities, they say, well, he confessed to the crime. That's always in nature. So what if he gets to court and denies? So there are just so many things that are not just in place to ensure that people keep doing these things. Some of them do it because they feel they can and they can get away with it.
And some do because they are just economic crimes. And it underscores greatly what Maokwe said. The president has talked about pulling people out of poverty, and this is clearly an economic crime because they just wanted to make money. Remember, this thing happened, was it last week or week before, where some people in, I think it was in Oyo State, one of these southwestern states, killed one person simply because they want to use his past to make money.
Well, part of the, it's a job of work for all of us. Sincerely. Because if government, sometimes the media focuses on how much has been spent. and not how effective those funds spent
Exactly.
have been.
Exactly.
So they look at what happened during the riots, when they raided the warehouses. They told us that they had distributed all of these palliatives. I mean, largely, that's the impression people had. And then you saw what happened thereafter. So results are different from what you hear from one. So it's just a whole mix. But let's see. We're trying to keep it a beautiful Monday morning, I tell you. But sometimes these things are not that easy. But yeah, we'll go ahead and delve into the dailies and see how do they reflect what is going on. There are concerns out there, and rightly so, because look at Nigerian Tribune, where they start off this morning. It's an ongoing conversation. And schools resume amid COVID-19 spike. So already that's a red flag. When you see this kind of headline, you think, as a parent, you know what races through your mind. And look at the riders, if we could help shed some light on this lead story. FG, states must not renege on putting in place necessary prevention measures. That's coming from ASU. Teachers ready for resumption. Private schools have measures in place. NUT, NAPST. Okay. Private schools have measures in place. I'm trying to wrap my head around it, but let me not stress so much on that. Will monitor implementation of COVID-19 protocols in schools. Guess who from?
I can't guess.
NANS. That's the reaction you get, right? I know. I thought they're supposed to be in school as well. So, what? They'll monitor implementation?
While in class? Okay, we'll see.
I think NANS should stop giving people that impression so that they make themselves a laughing stock. It doesn't all go well for some of these things. Confusion over HOS circular on stay-at-home order for civil servants in Lagos. Okay. On one hand, you know, as you like to say, you see schools are supposed to resume. Then the section of the civil servants are supposed to work from home, from their safety.
That's
comfort zone.
I don't even know what to call it. Is that an irony?
Oh boy, don't you just love some of these things as they play out? Well, just above this lead one, because there's several and we can't look at all of them. You can't hide under subsidy to punish Nigerians. Labour. Confusion in the National Assembly over subsidy regime. Well, Labour should know now that if they want a lot of people to take them seriously, they've got to up the game.
Nigerian News Direct this morning is talking about the same school resumption, and this is how. Postpone school resumption by 3 months, reps say. Stories on page 3. As Edo, Osun, others announce January 18 resumption date. So many other stories to pick from this morning. Oh, you thought this has happened, but right above the nameplate, FG activates NIN Enrollment Center at Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Stories on page 4.
Okay, I see that part where they say FG is asking diplomats that they must obtain NIN.
They are Nigerians. So
or Nigerian...
diplomats.
No, it says foreign diplomats. Foreign diplomats. That's what Tribune says.
Oh.
Foreign diplomats. Oh, we need to check that and see.
Interesting.
What's the rationale behind that?
National identity number for foreign diplomats? Oh. Anyway, the
devil
story
is in the detail.
Okay. Markwe.
Story. I mean, it was on the news last night. Foreign diplomats to obtain NIN if you're going to stay in the country 2 years plus, and I wondered, you know, how does this make any sense? If this is an identification number for Nigerians, but I mean, there are questions that we should pose, and hopefully questions that will not remain rhetorical. They are questions that demand and deserve answers, because we want to imagine that the NIN is like a social security number. Do we want to give that to foreigners as well? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that there will be answers to that, and the answers will make sense enough. But let's look at blueprint for you this morning. Bandits run riots in Niger, Kaduna, Zamfara. That's also on the front page as well. Kill Catholic priest, abduct 37 in Niger. As I did say, the news did have quite a bit of bad in it yesterday. A Catholic priest was killed and another 37 abducted in Niger. Ekiti to acquire drones, votes 1.4 billion naira for Amotekun. Hit Mutawale's village, slay ward head, 80-year-old woman, 13 others. Hours after killing scores of terrorists, NAF destroys 6 gun trucks. That's also on page 19 of the paper. They tie all of them together for you. They also have this one: demographic, racial factors will guide COVID-19 vaccines choice. That's according to NAFDAC. 88 countries put in requests, according to Okonjo Iweala. Yeah, remember that she's a part of that Gavi Alliance. I think she's the chair of the Gavi Alliance. Page 7 will give you more details. And you also have this one: COVID-19 fears worries that schools resume today. FCT reads Riot Act on protocols and no safety measures in places, according to a group. Well, let's leave it there for blueprint newspapers.
Yeah, Daily Independent next. FG's borrowing puts CBN's price stability remit at risk. So there you go. It's the big one for them here this morning, and concerns too about funding the budget, sale of government assets to fund the budget. Those are some of the highlights, which of course is of the 2021 budget.
Which of course is raising some dust already. SERAP is already asking, I think, the National Assembly to stop the FG from selling national assets.
National Assembly that passed the budget.
Well, passed the budget, but they did include selling national assets.
Well, they list all those things in the budget. If you go through that same budget and see some of the, for instance now, the duties on imported vehicles, new vehicles, it was high. Yeah. If you go through that budget again, you see concerns there that they say, look, it's been way lowered. So you could flood them in, bring them all in. And then people are asking questions. So what happens to all those manufacturing and assembly cars here? Now that after it's kicked off, countries like Rwanda, countries like Ghana, where you have Volkswagen and some of these countries, they've gone to start assembling and manufacturing there. Doesn't mean they can all equally flood in here. So what advantage do we then get? So, look.
Oh, we'll get more taxes.
More taxes? So those who are assembling here, who have got loans from banks, what happens to all of them? Well, sometimes I will take you one step forward and how many backwards, you just wonder.
Well, maybe when you get the details, you'll probably find out.
Well, look at what you spoke about. Stop Buhari from selling public assets to fund budget. SERAP tells NAS. The same NAS that passed the budget with all of these explanations in there. I don't know how that's going to work. That's Daily Independent this morning anyway.
The Daily Trust newspaper is also talking economic this morning. States squander billions as ruling parties clear LG polls. That's what we have there. Kano spends 2.3 billion naira, Rivers 2 billion naira, Kaduna 1 billion naira, Plateau 1 billion naira, Jigawa, Gombe, Ondo, others mum on expenditure. It's a fraud, CSO say. Call for CX scrap. This is coming up again.
Then what? You scrap CX, then
go to INEC.
Then INEC, the same thing happens, or they put, I don't know.
That story is on page 3 of the paper this morning, and so many others. COVID-19, Edo, Kaduna government suspend school resumption. That's new, right?
That's Kaduna government, right?
And Edo. The story is on page 6 of the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. So many other stories to pick from. Let's leave it there for the Daily Trust. Malcolm.
Well, we're looking at the Abuja Inquirer this morning, and you see this one: COVID-19, schools resumption, Nigerians divided. That's what you find on the front page. FCTA reads Riot Act to school heads. It's right there. Police lose 4 men to bandits. 1 officer is missing. That story is there as well. And if you look at the bottom for Esther Uzoma More garlands, tributes, yes, to those whom we've lost. And you also see this, an ode to Albert Okumagba by Ambassador Igali. Just on top of the nameplate, Al-Majirai to El Rufai, stop being ignorant of us. Okay, what's causing that particular statement? What's bringing it about? Page 3 might give you all the details. Let's leave it there for the Abuja Inquirer this morning.
Well, Vanguard is next. 24 killed as bandits, cultists go on rampage. You see this kind of stories time and again. 5 policemen killed by bandits in Kaduna. No, it's 4 police. 4, 1,
even 1
lives. You know, much as you may understand the context, but you know. Ward head, 80-year-old woman, others also killed in Kaduna. Soldiers, 5 civilians dead, others injured during clash in Maiduguri. Late Ghana's loyalists attack Benue community, kill 3, raise houses. Military arrests 2, recovers weapons. Bakassi cult war claims 4 lives. In Niger, Catholic priest killed. Younger brother, 17 others kidnapped. Stop killing of religious leaders by bandits, Khan tells FG. So, you know, some will just, you read some of our headlines this morning. Are they killing fields everywhere or what? What's going on? Well, it's so defined on the front page here this morning. And look, there's just so much, just so many of them. But don't forget to check out the back page. Perhaps it could lighten your day. Vanguard Sports there. Okoye concedes 5 goals against PSG. Okay, not good enough. But that's Vanguard this morning anyway.
Take a look at the Daily Times newspaper. Experts warn against fresh lockdown. That story is on page 2 of the Daily Times newspaper this morning, and it's definitely what it is. Of course, something that's been giving a lot of people concern as well. Khan asks Buhari to stop killing of religious leaders. You find the details. It's about insecurity. And U.S. inauguration, Joe Biden to issue executive orders to reverse Trump policies. That's the Daily Times newspaper this morning.
Okay.
Well, let's quickly take a look at leadership. Only good governance will heal civil war wounds, as according to ACF. We must use our history to build a new Nigeria, according to NEF. A lot of abbreviations for you. I'll leave you to do that yourself. Let's address remote causes of the war. That's according to Ohaneze. And Afenifere insists on restructuring. That's also there as well. 2023 presidency, 42 groups make case for Northeast. So that conversation is happening in some areas. 22 million housing deficit. Federal government redone to sign MOU on 774,000 housing units. You know, this 774,000 is making rounds almost everywhere. If you're not talking about 774,000 jobs, you're talking about 774,000 housing units. Well, find out how this one is supposed to work. Page 4 will give you details. And yes, Chamberlain, they have that story. NIN enrollment compulsory for diplomats, as according to the federal government. Of course, they continue to mourn the chairman of leadership group, Simon Dazaya, and the pictures there, you know, show people continue to pay condolence visits to the family. Let's leave it there for leadership newspapers.
And then to The Guardian, economic managers in policy trap as inflation climbs higher. Key structural issues should be addressed, say economists, LCCI. Capital flight at its highest as inflows dry up. So that's a picture for you. And then equally, outdated NIMC facilities stalling NIN-SIM linkage. So there you go. This is Janet, right? Don't be surprised if we're talking about this next January. I hope it's not a cover to register other people when you want diplomats to get this thing. Well, foreign nationals. I don't know. Mark,
This day has this one. Concerns mount as schools reopen today amid rising COVID-19 cases. No protocols in place. ASU insists Lagos schools to run second term for 61 days. Arrest fake vaccines peddlers. NMA tell federal government, we did raise this last week Friday, that, you know, some vaccine, in quote, you know, was making the rounds in the country in some areas, and it's very important that NAFDAC looks at it. So that's been confirmed that indeed there are some fake ones, and NAFDAC is saying, look, be careful. Uncertainty over IJ's tenure hampers activities at Force headquarters. That's also there. With CBN's intervention, discourse revenue collection in steady rise. Well, let's hope it's for the good and that it eventually translates to electricity for the majority, if not all, Nigerians. Let's leave it there for this day newspapers.
All right, so there you go. That's a look at some of the dailies here this morning. We're back in a moment. Stay with us.
The coronavirus pandemic has emphasized the importance of hand washing. Just when the world was trying to recover from the impact of the first wave of the coronavirus, the second wave hits again. Though it is said to be deadlier than its predecessor, a huge number of the populace in Nasarawa State are treating its presence with laxity. On the streets, people carry out their activities unmindful of the severity of the second wave of the pandemic. Commercial motorcycle and tricycle operators alongside their passengers are on the move without any form of protection. Petty business owners too. The very few complying drop their face mask on their jaws. All of this is despite government's restrictions, even as some of them are aware of its existence.
People should know that it is real. I know there is a lot of controversy about COVID-19, but people should please be careful, and the government, I know all what the government said is for the good of the masses.
In recent weeks, the state is recording a spike in the number of confirmed cases, which has surpassed 1,000. The government is worried about the growing numbers and is extending sensitization campaigns to the hinterlands. Governor Abdullahi Sule meets with all district heads. He wants them to take the message of the new variant to their people.
I strongly believe that because of your closeness to the populace, you will do us a big favor by being the ones who will convey our concerns and the different areas of protocols and assist us on the awareness when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic.
There is less burden at the State Specialist Hospital Isolation Center, as many patients take to home care, except for few severe cases. Over 10 doctors here have also tested positive. The Chief Medical Director, however, insists preparation are in top gear.
We are ready for it. We've had the experience during the first wave, and this second wave is actually proving to be deadlier than the first wave in terms of the quantity of patients that come, and then even the severity of the ailment. But we're doing the best that we can.
While the people are placing wealth above health, and the government is putting in place measures to stem the spread of the virus, it's an opportunity for others to make stipends. The sale of face masks resurfaces again, with the sellers mostly children, targeting no mask, no entry spots. Though aware of its necessity, they are not wearing one either. Although the government is stepping up efforts to contain the virus, if the people do not take responsibility, the spike may continue, as the safest bet for protection is adherence to safety protocols. Halima Gayam, Channels Television News.
Welcome back. Yes, indeed. It is January 18, the day that schools resume, even though there are different concerns in different parts of the country. So that is what we're starting off with today on the program. And as you may have seen in the welcoming slide, we're here in the studios. We've got Mrs. Olushola Gbadibo here with us. She is an educationist. Good morning, and thank you for coming on today.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
And then joining us via Zoom, we've got Professor Innocent Uja, who is the president of Nigerian Medical Association and former Director General, Nigerian Institute of Medical Research in Lagos. He joins us from Benue State, as well as Honorable Awaji Nombek Abiante, a member of the House Committee on Basic Education. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us as well today on the program.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Good morning, and thank you very much.
All right, let me start with here in the studio. As you may have, if you caught our opening sequence, the daily is reflecting concerns. Schools resume amid COVID-19 spike, and different sectors. I mean, some others say Nigerians divided on the resumption today. Where do you stand on this matter?
Well, my thinking is that it's good for schools to reopen, because whether the children are at home or they are in school, they still have parents and other people around them that go out. And whatever those people are coming in with is going to affect the children. But when the children are in school, we make sure that we put all safety protocols in place, like the washing of hands with soap, using of sanitizers, and social distancing, and all the other safety measures that we are supposed to put in place. So from the end of the school, I believe the children are safe.
So what about the concerns that people raise, that they think that quite a number of schools have not put in place this protocol, only a very minute percentage, and they predicate their concerns on that?
Well, I wouldn't want to agree with that, in the sense that as school owner, you wouldn't want anything to happen to the children under your care. So you put in everything, as much as the government has told us to put in place, to make sure they are on ground, so that in case of anyone, like when the children are coming in, the first thing that we do is we take their temperature, and intermittently we take their temperature to see that any child that is having high temperature is not allowed into the school. And before you even enter, you first of all wash your hand at the wash hand basin before you proceed to the class. And even during school hours, we make sure that we sanitize everywhere, and even the children. And they must come in with their face shield, everybody, including the teachers and other staff.
How do you maintain social distancing in the premises?
Well, we space the seats in the class, and we make sure that, as at last term when we were in school, there was no assembly, and we made sure that the children were not using the playground. So they were like kind of restricted a bit from all the other normal school activities, except for the main education curricula.
So as far as you're concerned, your school have put in place this protocol and you should be in session?
Yes, I'll say that.
All right. Honorable Abiante, what say you on this matter?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I actually feel the pains. I feel the pains of several Nigerians, including the position our mother, our sister, who just put forward her own take, that there is need for schools to reopen, giving assurances that they will do this, they will do that. Our concern has been that nobody substantially has done anything relative to providing the very basic necessities, basic means of adhering to the protocols as laid down by government, especially with the public institutions, the public schools. She has spoken from the perspective of the private schools, which ordinarily we know and believe have the capacity, have the commitment to make these facilities and ensure that the positions are taken and kept. I am talking about that pupil who will go to Yangoji school, that local government education authority school in Abuja. I'm talking about Abuja. I'm talking about that person whose schools at one-man village. Not to talk of the peoples in communities like Agbakroma in my own constituency, who don't even have water. The community as a whole don't have water. They don't have a borehole. Not to talk of the luxury of having to provide it in the schools. Our position has been, yes, we are not saying schools should not reopen. Schools should reopen. But the fact remains that we have no data suggesting and submitting that majority of the schools have the capacity and the willingness to ensure that the protocols are kept. We are the same people who made interventions relative to students in exit classes, having in mind that there will be enough space, they can take all the classrooms that are available to enable them keep to the positions of and requirements of social distancing. But here you are asking everybody to resume. There are schools in this country where the pupils learn under trees, up to now that I speak with you. The challenge of accommodation is very huge in these schools. What has government done between the time that this COVID came, the first phase, the first wave, and now? What have they done? Nothing, absolutely nothing. The level of preparedness of this government, this very government, in keeping to the things that they have laid out is very, very appalling.
If you could just clarify some of your submissions. But when you say you have no data to rely on to show that certain people have complied, so upon what then, how did you come to the decision that schools should not reopen if you have no data?
I didn't say that there are no data that we use. We are in sync.
That's what I heard you say.
We are in sync with the UBE. And from what they have not, those things have not been made available to everybody. So on what premise is the government relying to open the school? Don't forget that it is the same government that came to us to say, no, we think we cannot reopen on the 18th. What additional information did they get? Because the available data at the time they say schools cannot reopen on the 18th suggests that the very basics have not been met, have not been kept. But what additional data have they provided? That is my question. I didn't say there's no data at all. What additional data did they have that countered their position that they cannot reopen on the 18th? Don't forget that the same federal government told us at the press briefing, school will reopen on the 18th. They came back and said, no, school will not reopen on the 18th. We have to reevaluate. After re-evaluating that position, what have they put forward to us? Nothing.
If you could shed a little more light on this, because just as you equally highlighted that the private schools, you say they have the capacity to go ahead and comply with these protocols, but you are concerned about the public schools. So, because that means that the decision you're taking now, or the House is suggesting now, will equally affect the private schools. So, could you just tell us, what did the House or the committee rely on to come up with that suggestion that several schools have not complied, or a minute percentage has complied?
Thank you very much. The House is made up of members from different backgrounds, different constituencies, with different challenges. We had our meeting online, and members were asked to make submissions based on their findings. Don't forget that we're on holidays. I am not in Abuja, meaning that I am somewhere within my constituency. I have looked at what is available here, and they have not conformed substantially with the requirements. The same with members from several other areas. And we are saying, we're not against school reopening. We didn't say school shouldn't reopen. We said, give 3 months, and government should be serious with providing the very basic requirements. One of the requirements is that there should be a central entry and exit point. How many of the primary schools in my village, how many of the primary schools, even in your own village, are fenced? How many of the primary schools in Karan and Moda are fenced? These are some of the challenges. It is also required that they will have a means of keeping to the WASH standard, water, sanitation, and hygiene. There are no boreholes. These three months window will afford and can afford a serious government to make interventions in these areas. These are the things that we are saying. How many of us, even on the streets, not as students, adhere to the protocols of wearing masks? You take the census. How many, you showed us something that's happening in Nasarawa State. How many Nigerians did you find in Nasarawa wearing masks? talk less of those that are going to be in school. Those who
just hang on a minute, Honorable. We'll come back to that. Let's move. Let's get Professor Uja to equally comment on this matter. Prof, you're a medical professional. What is going through your mind now?
Well, thank you very much, my friend. It's unfortunate that we have to be going round and round. The Nigerian Medical Association had made this statement before. Now, what I probably will say and start with is that what lessons have we learned 1 year after? If we know that students should go to school and they should go to school, what facilities are we put in place? Our problem is that we do a lot of talking and doing very little. It's also true that we do not listen to experts. Now, what we have been saying is that this coronavirus pandemic is totally unprepared for. And that had been since it started. And 1 year after, what lessons have we learned? We know that students will go to school. We know that they should maintain the NCDC protocol. But what have we done in the schools? You see, Nigeria is a very, very interesting country, a country full of contradictions. At one point, we should do social distancing, we should follow the protocol. At the other point, where we are going to be ready. At the other point, we are ready. Whether it is private, whether it is public, injury to one is an injury to all. The truth is that we have no statistics, as far as I know, of the number of schools that are ready, whether public or private, and what they should put in place. I think that we are very sentimental as a nation. Let's follow the advice of experts. While we are saying that schools could reopen, we should be prepared, and there should be monitored. Who are those monitoring? Who are those supervising the process? Because we talk and we don't supervise. In Nigeria, unless you push, nobody works.
Prof,
and I don't believe
just
that.
As you said, my apologies. Just as you said, you've put out this statement over and over again that you do not think it's right for schools to resume now. But one wonders what your recommendation would be, given that from what the Federal Ministry of Education is saying, they had consultations with state governors, with commissioners of education, with proprietors and heads of schools, staff unions, even students. And that's the data, perhaps, upon which they said it's time for us to resume school. So what would be your own recommendation against this?
Let me just tell you that sometimes we walk from the answer. You see, the truth is that when we say parents, where we say they do not, even those who are not in school, they are not obeying just like the honorable member of the House said. Those of us on the streets, how much of compliance to the NCDC protocol? We are not complying. We say this. The Nigerian Medical Association have been singing that we need to comply. Now, suddenly, everybody says people should go to school. What evidence have they had? If the Minister of Education says so, who are the supervisors? Where do they go to monitor or to supervise the process? To say, well, what you have said, you are correct because we have evidence to show that this number of schools have complied. It's not just sit on the round table and say that we want the school to be reopened, there should be no problem. You see, we have suffered this because people do not listen to experts. The Nigerian Medical Association, from the beginning, cautioned on all grounds. The process of entry, how we should stop people from coming in. We talked about social distancing. We talked everything that we need to do to present scientifically we have done. But we have no power of enforcement. We cannot enforce anything. Our own is to advocate and bring out the scientific component, not political or the sentimental component of this pandemic. And that's why we face what we are facing today. Look at today. We are overwhelmed with the second wave. There's no oxygen. Patients are overwhelmed. The hospitals are overwhelmed. Why should we wait until we are overwhelmed before we will act? We need to be, that is what we call emergency preparedness and response. We need to prepare. Planning is very important. And I think in the area of planning, we have not been doing very well. And the national response, okay, you see, even the non-pharmaceutical component of the response is not being complied with. A lot of people still are going all over the place without bothering. So we are saying that if the school should reopen, which we say they should, we must be prepared. Prepared in that I don't see how we can control the students. I don't see that.
All right, Prof. Let's bring that
in
back to the educationist in the studio. Maybe she has some answers for us. That component is also a concern for the UNICEF. Children don't mind, distance learning, virtual learning, but that element of playing with their friends, of learning together in a class, controlling that is going to be really difficult, don't you think?
Well, the thing is, with the virtual learning, it may not be so easy for some group of parents. But when the children are in the school, they don't mix at all. But the thing is, we try and educate them and make sure that they don't hug or they don't do things that will cause them to kind of mix together in such a way that if there's any, and we are even sure that there can't be anybody, because before they come in, we have taken their temperature and we have taken all that we need to know about them.
Is there a plan to conduct COVID-19 tests for students in school?
No.
Because it's part of the recommendation of the Federal Ministry of Education under the school readiness template for school at the school level, that parents are supposed to submit the field COVID-19 consent form for testing.
Well, not on ground yet. Presently, we are not having such plans. All we do is take all the necessary protocols.
But did the schools agree to some of this? Because if they came up with that notice, it means that that is what everybody has agreed to.
Not to my knowledge. Even from the National Association, that's of proprietaries, I don't think there's anything agreed to in such manner.
So is the National Association on the same page that schools can go ahead and resume?
Sure.
So what about the concerns they raise about the public schools? Because, I mean, yes, private, they say may be ready, but they have concerns about the private sector.
Well, the public schools, I think the government should have made provisions, but I can speak for Lagos State. Like in Lagos State, they make sure that they provide all the necessary things like washing of hands, providing a temperature for the gauge for them to take their temperature and things like that. So I can speak for Lagos State.
Do you think it's a good idea for government to conduct COVID-19 tests for the students? You remember that in October, we mentioned it earlier today, 181 students in one school tested positive for COVID-19. And that, of course, is because they tested. Do you think it's a good thing that the government should also make that something that schools should do?
Well, if the government can do it, it will be a good thing. Because the government is asking people, the public schools now to come in. But the private schools are taking precautions. But the public schools are not doing anything. I'm not talking of Lagos State, but most other states, they are not doing anything. So if the government can conduct COVID-19 states and test for the children, it will be a good thing.
Professor Uja, do you think would it comfort you if students were to take COVID-19 tests in schools just to ascertain their state?
That would have been the ideal thing, but it will not happen. It will not happen because even some states do not believe that they have COVID in their state. You see, the truth is that, let me just say this, Chamberlain. If you ask the private schools that the children should stay at home, but they should pay school fees to the schools, they will tell you, okay, that is good. So what we are looking at is not necessarily the interest of the students. It is the fact that you know that many of the schools were down during the lockdown, where schools were not reopening because the schools are not getting money to even pay the teachers. And that is one area that we must look at. It is not because they want, I'm not saying that it's the totality of all schools, but the monetary component is what appears in my mind to be supreme to the private schools. First of all, and secondly, the public schools, I don't think that they can cope. And you see, a human being is a human being, whether public or private, the only thing that separates both of them is poverty and riches. So in Nigeria, we are all equal before God. And I believe that there's no need to segregate. In this case, if we are not ready and ready to comply with the protocol, there's no need for the student to go to school. You have to be alive to be in school. And there's no age determinants in terms of going to school. Anybody, you recall that there have been somebody who about 70 or 60 years went to primary school or secondary school. No, now why we are saying that we should be more serious. If we are ready and prepared with the protocol and comply with the protocol, which you and I know that is not true, then the schools can reopen. Now, when we say that schools should not reopen last year, everybody said the school reopened. Some parents were even making derogatory statements about the NMA. That you can see that there's no professionalism, because if the professional will say, look, these are the dangers, these are the risks, and somebody who has no modicum of idea as to why these things come about, then be saying all sorts of things, then you know that we are not there yet. And that is where we have these problems. The reality is that many of the schools, including some of the private schools, and many of the private, maybe Lagos, but outside Lagos and probably Abuja, it is difficult to say how many of the private schools are ready. And Lagos is not Nigeria. Lagos is just one of the 36 states and FCT of this country. So we cannot extrapolate what's happening in Lagos totally. Even in Lagos, there are some places in Ajegule and Elimosho that do not have the capacity. So let's not just extrapolate Lagos to Nigeria. We are all human beings. The problem is poverty and riches, and we should not segregate. So if we are not ready, we are not ready. It doesn't matter what anybody feels. And as experts, we are to give our advice and caution about the pandemic. We have not been able to contain this. If anything is now geometrically increasing, and you can see the statistics that we have, which we think is probably 1/3 of the reality of what is happening on ground. Now, what about oxygen? How many schools have oxygen to even give emergency preparedness? How many schools have a clinic that if a child has fever? How many, if you go and find out, that's why I say with the Federal Ministry of Education should monitor how many of these schools have thermometers. We are very quick to make a statement or to feel that if it's our children today, we'll say no. But because I believe that if the school reopens, my child will stay at home. Because the reality is that I cannot manufacture a child.
Remember, Prof, you equally did say that we don't have data for some of these things. So when we ask those questions as to how many schools have done this and that, it may sound rhetorical because we don't have the answer to that.
Chamberlain, you have casual data that we have. If you go to the street, I've been on the street, I've gone to the marketplace, I've gone to the bank, and all you need to do is just to stand and observe how many people that have this. You don't need to go and do a statistics of everybody.
All right, well. But you extrapolated now, Prof, didn't you? You extrapolated from what you saw in the banks, and then you now say, everybody is not ready.
Even in Lagos that we are talking about, we were talking about in Lagos, go to Ajegule and Alimosho and see whether people, even the central Lagos area. You see,
all right, so we'll come back to this in a moment, Prof. Pardon me, but just hang on a minute. We'll be back in just a moment. Stay with us.
One in every 5 of the world's out-of-school children is in Nigeria. Even though primary education is officially free and compulsory, about 10.5 million of children aged 5 to 14 years are not in school. These statistics is from the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, UNICEF. The situation is even worse in the north as a result of the effect of insurgency and other economic barriers and socio-cultural norms, including practices that discourage attendance in formal education, especially for girls. States like Kano are trying to bridge this gap, and that is why it's brought together parents, traditional rulers, and community leaders to deliberate on how best to develop education, especially in rural communities.
Education is no longer the business of government alone.
The majority leader of the House of Representatives identifies what is required to improve the standard of education.
Every important person in the society is also expected to play his own bit in the development of the educational sector. We are all beneficiaries of the educational development of our own communities. Without education, we would have not come to this level. Without education, our children as well would not have come to this level.
While traditional rulers appreciate the support of government and various individuals, they advocate the need for more assistance in order to ensure that all children are educated, especially as education is free and compulsory in Kano State.
It is encouragement to the pupils to give their contribution toward the development of education in all parts and sectors of the local of the education. So we pray to Allah to continue guiding us and give us courage to give our support and contributions toward the development of the education in our state.
As the drive to improve the standard of education in the state continues, the State Senior Secondary School Management Board presented a word of appreciation to some individuals for their support and contribution to the state free and compulsory education program. Idris Jubrin, Channels Television News.
Welcome back. We're taking a look at the perspectives concerning school resumption. Today, the House thinks otherwise. They shouldn't go ahead and resume, but Mrs. Gbadebo telling us that they have put in place those COVID-19 protocol and they are good to go. But let me get back to you, Honorable Abiante. When you say the House had this meeting online, you asked questions about how many states or schools are compliant, and the feedback was not good enough. But what is being done, or what recommendations was there or was given about doing something about the economies of these schools? Because in several other states, several businesses, they've resumed, several things have gone back to at least doing business, doing a thing or two. But for these schools too, are we glossing over the fact that, look, something needs to be done? Because I do remember the emergency stimulus package, which was passed by the House. I'm not sure what happened in the National Assembly. There are still questions as to how many were even attended to, because the economies of these areas have got to be considered. Did you factor that in?
Yeah, thank you very much for that concern. Before I clear that, I would also want to get back to some of the issues that have been raised as a result of these discussions. The educationists mentioned the fact that they take temperature of students. I want to state that taking temperatures alone should not be enough. It won't be a very clear indicator if somebody is infected with COVID-19 or not. And when you talk about testing, what is the interval of the testing? Is the testing going to be done every day? Is it going to be done every 2 days? You can conduct a test on Monday, and by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, somebody is infected and he would get back to school and contaminate several others. We have stated one fact here, and the fact is that we seem not to have clear-cut data on what is happening. And it's unfortunate, very unfortunate, because almost every agency, department, or ministries in government have departments saddled with the responsibility of planning, doing research, and at the end of the day, they will come out with data they call statistics. We also have a National Bureau of Statistics. Since these things started, what has been their input? What have they been doing? What have they done? Nobody should have been talking about, oh, we don't have the data, we don't have the knowledge. Maybe if they have, it's not public. If everybody concerned has really done their job. Back to the clip that you showed us about Kano State, where they were making, having discussions on how to move education sector forward, and probably they must have discussed issues about how to resume school. You could find out that several of the people seated there never had their nose mask or their face mask on. They never had it. So what are they telling us? What is the implication to the larger society? It simply means that we may not be ready. And back to our submissions, we had said, if the government is serious, take 3 months and get to remedy the much that can be remedied to ensure that schools have gotten to the point where they can conveniently and comfortably reopen.
Well,
there have been interventions in several
just one moment, just perhaps to get some perspective on some of the things that you have raised. You know, the question there that comes to my mind is, of all the conversations you have heard, are you saying that there was no conversation with the PTF COVID-19 at all? No conversation with the Ministry of Federal Ministry of Health to say whether or not, you know, we are ready? Because your committee is one of several in the House of Representatives, and there is a House Committee on Health. I would assume that some of these things, they are already also being carried out. So are you saying there was no conversation with any agency of government to verify, to speak with you about this matter?
Thank you very much for that observation. In fact, Professor Uja has stated it clearly as it should be said, that in Nigeria, we do more of talking. We talk, oh, we have done this when it has not been done. We are doing this when we don't even have the intention or the intent of doing them. We sat with the relevant agencies and ministries of government and developed a template alongside the Ministry of Education, things that will be required, things that will be necessary. We had our input. These are the things that we expect should be done for schools to conveniently and comfortably reopen without having the fears, without having to have the anxiety of what happens to our children. How much of it has been implemented? That is our concern. Our finding is that the whole thing is on paper. It's just the paper. I have a copy here. It's just paper. Nobody has consciously and consensuously done anything to ensure that these things are put in place. We are not just saying it today that schools will require to have enough classrooms. No. We are not just saying it today that schools will require to have wash facilities. No, we have said this long ago.
Okay, Honorable,
even before the students wrote.
What was in that recommendation?
Implemented.
Just a minute. In that recommendation, could you talk to us about what was said about students in public schools and them going to school via public transport? What did you say? What was the recommendation on that?
If you must take students via public transport,
okay,
are the facilities even available?
No. My question is, Honorable, on that recommendation, just a minute, on that recommendation, what was this? Could you read it to us? Because you say it's already there.
Government is encouraged to provide facilities to transport students to their various schools to and fro. That is the recommendation. Government is encouraged. That is for the public schools. The private schools have their own arrangements. They do. They have their arrangements. And if you don't keep to the template that have been laid out for schools to reopen, what exactly do we want to do? What exactly are we saying we want to do? We want to reopen schools when the very basic things that we are supposed to put in place have not been put in place. That is our. We are not saying schools should not reopen. No, schools should reopen. But we are saying, can the government?
When you say government is encouraged, that's neither here nor there. Because I mean, we have a different states tell you, look, that is if you mandated them deliberately. Because even today, it's so difficult for a lot of them to do that. But you didn't speak to the question as to what is being done about the economies of those schools. Are you just saying don't open until all these things are done because it appears as though they can't fulfill all those requirements?
Good. I was actually coming to that. There have been several interventions in the areas of agriculture, even in the areas of health. There have been interventions. We also expect that there should be interventions to save
for the schools, not the country.
There should be interventions to save the educational sector in this country. This is the future of Nigeria.
No. What was the House's recommendation for the economies of those schools if you say they should not open? Because remember, several teachers did come up asking for help because many of them have not been paid.
The House explicitly, recommended that government should give support to schools, especially the privately owned schools, because the government institutions, government schools, the teachers still draw salaries. The area of the greater challenge were the private schools, that government should give support to the schools. That was the recommendation of the Committee on Basic Education.
Did the Senate concur with that recommendation?
I will not be able to say yes or no here because I can't really record that.
No, but you're a member of the National Assembly. This is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I am a member of the National Assembly. I think the House of Reps, Chamberlain, the House of Reps, where I'm a member, we made that recommendation, and we sat with the Ministry of Education. Sitting with the Ministry of Education meant that there had been that understanding between both chambers, and part of the recommendation that was forwarded to the Ministry of Education was to give support. They should give support to the private schools. The public schools still take their salaries, so they are not the major issues here. The major issues are those in the private sector who cannot get their salaries because schools have not opened.
So could you tell us then, what happened to the stimulus bill, the first and the second one? Did the National Assembly pass it? Can you hear me? Okay, well, Margaret, let's get to Margaret. I think she's got some questions as well. Margaret.
Indeed, I mean, now the date has not been shifted. Some people will say, you know, what exactly is the point of this conversation? Because today is D-Day. Some children will be going back to school today. What exactly should we be expecting now that, you know, the schools are reopening anyway? What advice will, say, Professor Innocent Uja give to students or parents who are going to be letting their students or their children go back to school today? For the schools that are reopening, what precautions would he say they must adhere to, for instance, to ensure that students are safe while they're in school? Prof, this is for you.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. First of all, what should we be expecting? We expect that many more children will get infected. That is our prediction. The second is that we've been talking about maintaining or complying with the NCDC protocol of regular hand washing, use of sanitizers, use of face mask, and social distancing. Those components have failed because even parents were not using it, not to talk about children. You all know that children's immunity is lower than that of the adults, and therefore the risk of contracting COVID-19 is far, far more among children than adults. So we've said it, and we've said this over and over again. What else can we say? It is probably just for us to be singing now, because Nigerian Medical Association has done all that it needs to do. We've talked to the policymakers, we've talked to legislators, we've talked to parents, so what else do we do? We have no power of enforcement. We cannot enforce anything. All we are doing is to give professional advice and also say that we should be very cautious. But it depends on who wants, even the belief system. You saw that they will say, hey, doctors have come again. But when it really downs on us,
sorry to interrupt you, Prof.
Say that, yes.
The question is this. I mean, so far we have seen and I don't know if this is scientific, but so far we have seen that this virus hasn't affected children as much as it has affected the elderly. Indeed, the immunity of children are not as developed as that of adults, but for some reason, it has been shown and proven that children have not been affected with the virus as much as an older demographic, for instance. So what danger, given the experience that we've had in the first wave and also our experience over the holidays, and even right now with the statistics that we have, we've had, if at all, we have had no child dying as a result of this particular ailment. Is it really expedient for us to say, look, until all of these safety protocols are put in place, no child should go to school?
So are we saying that children should start dying before we prevent? What we are doing is prevention. We want to prevent, not to see them dying before we say children are infected. You will know that the risks, the exposure, first of all, we need to expose a large number of people. At the moment, the exposure is more of the adult, and because many of the children are indoors and are kept in the house, the parents go out, and that is the exposure. Now, the truth of the matter is that it is what you see that you know. Many of these people that probably are infected, we don't have the records. We are saying that probably we do not suffer the same as happens in Europe and America. But the truth is that we don't have a very reliable statistics. There are so many people that are dying.
Even in Europe and America,
don't go to
sorry to interrupt you again, but even in America, where the statistics are available and where, increasingly we see visuals and things of the sort, we haven't, nobody wants any child to die, certainly not. But what we're saying is, from evidence available, have we been able to show that this virus affects children adversely? And I think that's the key word there. Yes, one can be infected, but the question is, do you fall ill as a result of it? After all, we've heard of adults who are completely asymptomatic even though they've been infected. I think the concern, and what has raised a lot of concerns for people and why this has been declared a global pandemic, is the fact that people are dying from it. But if our children, and for some reason children are completely protected from the adverse effects of the virus, what precisely are we protecting them from?
Actually, I don't think you've gotten it right. If it is the number of deaths, then we shouldn't bother ourselves. Because unlike Ebola, that will kill about 98%, COVID-19 will kill between 3 to 4% of the population. So it means that we don't need to bother. Health is not about dying. Health is about the state of physical, mental, and social well-being of an individual. And we should take it that way. We should be prepared. And as professionals, we will continue to caution people, we continue to advise. It's not when people are down, then you say, well, unless you want us to experiment. And at this stage, we should not experiment. Otherwise, we expose many of the children to the disease, to the virus, and see how many of them will come down. That is a research study. I don't think any child, any parent would want his or her daughter or son to be exposed to say whether many more children are dying or not. Statistics is not the issue. These are human beings. In a family, if one person dies, that's 100% for that family. So what we are saying is that we need to prevent. That is what we call emergency preparedness and response. We need to respond, need to prevent, and prevention is better than cure. So I don't think it is correct. We're not saying that children should not go to school. We are saying that we must be prepared to ensure that they don't contract the disease. And by doing that, we are saying that people should obey the protocol, the NCDC protocol. And all we need to do, give ourselves 2, 3, 4 weeks and monitor what's happening in the schools. It will be the first 2 weeks, that people will comply, even those who will comply. After that, they throw all this advice to the winds. So I'm saying that we don't have to wait. We don't have to experiment on people, expose children to the virus before we know that they are going to be infected.
Well, Prof, the way you put it, it's not that these schools Just a minute. Not that they're exposing the children deliberately to all of this, is because, as you heard, they put in place certain measures. So they didn't completely ignore all of those protocols, as it were. But you are saying that if schools open, your child will not go to school. For how long will this be? Because, I mean, experts have said it time and again that, look, this virus will be here with us for a while. We'll have to adjust and put things in place to live with it.
Yes. What I'm saying is that as long as the schools are not prepared, because you see, let's not take one aspect of the story. We say they should be prepared, and the essence is that the schools must be prepared. You see, it is going to be very expensive, and I'm happy that the member of the House, honorable member of the House, said this. There should be some level of intervention. There should be a level of palliative to the schools. It is terrible. It is not easy. And therefore, we have to balance the economy.
Okay, because
people are going to school.
All right, Prof. We're winding down now, so we just need to see how we can make it quick for everyone. Pardon me. Honorable, when you did talk about, I mean, if you say your constituency doesn't have some things, no provision of water, borehole, and none would have thought, isn't that part of why you were there in the first place, to ensure that all of these facilities are in place for your constituency, which is in Rivers State, I stand corrected? But then, what Mrs. Gbadebo here did equally say in her opening was that if you say schools shouldn't open, it does appear as though we may not be considering all of these factors together, because the markets are open. Several other places are open. So people, parents will go out and come home and meet the world and things like that. So when you say schools don't open, are we looking at it holistically?
Thank you very much. We are making our efforts as much as we can. If everybody were born the same day, probably you would say you solve all the problems in one day. We are making interventions and getting the attention of government, and that is why you see sometimes my people get so worried, they get so agitated, because things that ordinarily should have been solved 50, 20, 80 years ago have remained unsolved, even despite the fact that we are contributing so much towards the purse of the government. Even if you devote all the resources that you have today to the provision of one single infrastructure, water, you may not be able to get it run everywhere. And don't forget also that our environment is so challenged that the way, means, and the resource you use to get water somewhere else, you cannot have that in.
Essentially, it would seem like what you're saying.
Coming from. So we have the government to assist us the more.
Okay, it would seem like what you're saying is that we cannot meet all of these challenges. But if we can't meet all of these challenges, then are we saying that we should everything should remain shut down? But we're running out of time. Let me take this on with you, Mrs. Gbadebo. Benjamin sends a tweet and mentioned us. Says, my child tested positive in a school last year, despite all the things the school assured us that they have in place, like your guest is claiming now. That is you. He did not have high temperature, so school's thermometer did not identify anything. Well, we can't tell whether it's a private school or a public school, but the symptoms will definitely be the same. How do you react to this?
The thing is, like I said earlier, we take our precautions. And another thing is, any child that you notice is having any symptoms, maybe like coughing, like having some health issues, we quickly isolate that child.
The challenge here, Mrs. Gbadebo, is COVID-19 is such that there will be no symptom at all, none at all, even when someone is positive.
I know that. But the thing is, everybody should take responsibility, even from the home. If, as a parent, you are taking responsibility of making sure that you wash your hands regularly and you educate your children regularly. If I do it, if you do it, if everybody does it, and the National Orientation Agency, if they do their own duty of educating Nigerians, then it will go a long way in limiting the spread of this COVID-19.
All right, then, Mrs. Olushola Gbadebo, an educationist. We've also had Honorable Awaji Inombe Kabiante, member of the House Committee on Basic Education, representing Owan Federal Constituency in Edo State, actually. And then we have Professor Innocent Uja, President, Nigerian Medical Association, and former Director General of Nigerian Institute for Medical Research. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, so we will be back in a moment. We've got another matter. Do stay with us.
Our focus on revamping the economy through the national economic diversification agenda that supports the primary goal of national food self-sufficiency. This has helped reduce the growing food-related inflationary figures and have in considerable measure positively impacted on our food security status during the long months of the pandemic lockdown. We are also currently rebuilding our national infrastructure base and in the process introducing transformation through the rehabilitation, modernization, and expansion of the railway system, national roads and bridges both in rural and urban centers alongside the airports and seaports. The reforms we have put in place in the power sector would guarantee increased efficiency in our drive to significantly expand the generation and distribution of electricity for use in homes and factories. With the recent opening of our borders, we expect that the pent-up demand of legitimate cross-border and international trade will boost the fortunes of the many small businesses and agricultural enterprises that depend on Nigeria trade and commerce. The message to our West African neighbors is that Nigeria is once again fully open for those willing to conduct business in a fair and equitable way.
Well, those were excerpts from the President's New Year Day speech, especially with regards to the economy. But part of what we had been having earlier, even though we were talking about education and the return of children to school, also borders on the economy. To discuss that with us this morning is Professor Magnus Pakol, who is Executive Chairman, Economic Growth and Development Center. You're welcome to the program, Prof.
Thank you very much.
Well, you have followed conversation from last year into this year. Last year, it was a very delicate balancing act between saving lives and protecting livelihoods. Inevitably, a lot of people lost their jobs. Inevitably, the economy went into a recession. We saw that also, in different parts of the world. The question now is, some people say we're even into something deeper than a recession. We're into a stagflation, so to speak, because inflation figures are also hitting the roof, the highest we've seen in the last 3 years. What exactly are not the potential now, but what exactly are the ways, the paths that you're seeing out of the quagmire which we found ourselves?
Well, thank you very much, Mark. I'm very happy to be with you guys this morning. The problem is that if anybody knew the solutions, exactly as we need them, we would not be in the situation, in the quagmire that we're in now. So, but there are some ideas, that we can start to look at. Well, first of all, let's go back a little bit. The problem we have actually goes back many years. It's a result of the economic complication that Nigeria found itself in because of the politics involved with what I'll call economic geography of the country. And I explained that. When we got oil, then we pivoted. In fact, we did not pivot. We shifted completely from the groundnuts, from the cocoa and all the other things that we were working on, where our people were very meaningfully deployed in terms of their labor. And then we went to a very capital-intensive kind of industry in crude oil production and some refining. And we did not carry our people along. Maybe as a result, we also did not put a lot of emphasis into investments in the human capital, in our people as assets, as the most important assets that we have. So to jump to now and act as though the problem just started last year is really not exactly the way to look at it. But that being the case, since we got COVID, since we got the livelihood problems and the lives problems last year, and they're still with us. So what do we see? What we've seen over the last few months is that we had some industries, or we have some industries that have done reasonably okay, like ICT, representing very large, probably 17–18% of GDP. Of course, because a lot of people sat at home during the lockdowns, and they were making phone calls, and they were using telecommunications and things like that, and they were using Zoom and all kinds of stuff like that. And then we also had increases in a very interesting area like chemicals and pharmaceuticals, because people were making hand sanitizers, and people buying hand sanitizers and cleansing agents and things like that. So we see, and then we also saw very good improvements in fintech. The fintech sector, or part of finance, began to do well as people just did a lot of things online. And in fact, I think that the data that suggests that the guys that are in that industry are raking in upwards of $300 million a year. So there are some improvements that we saw in certain sectors, but the bulk of the economy suffered, shown in the third quarter significant decline. And of course, even second quarter decline. So you got 2 consecutive quarters. But the problem I keep telling people is that let's not just look at the GDP headline numbers. Let's look at what's happening to the individual. Where are the jobs? Basically, where is the beef? The people don't have the beef. People don't have jobs. And the reason is because we have taken our eyes off the ball in terms of production. Nigeria has just not been producing goods and services and using people to do so. We've relied exclusively on oil production.
Indeed.
So we have to change.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, you have chronicled where the rain began to bite us economically as a country.
Yeah.
However, we've since realized that.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about diversification for years now. Sometimes we'll see a silver lining. We'll see, I don't want to say a flash in a pan, but that's how it looks sometimes when we see that, some of the sector, apart from the oil sector, has provided the bulk of what we see in the GDP, especially when they're doing good. Sometimes it's not so significant, but we can see it growing incrementally. We've also seen that even in the breakdown that you provided over the last 1 year, that it's not been all negative. In terms of what has happened to the economy. We've seen certain areas of the economy improve. However, the question is, there are challenges with manpower, because this seems to be a very specialized sector of the economy. Talking about ICT, talking about fintech, for instance. However, the consumer goods, which could mean factories. How sustainable is that if a government were to say, for instance, we want to go into we want to encourage the consumer sector, the consumer product sector, and also agriculture, which might not need too much specialization to go into. What are your thoughts with regards to those areas that could easily create even more jobs? And how sustainable do you think it will be on the long run?
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. That's why I talked about the complication in the economy. Now, in agriculture, I cannot remember any time recently where in any quarter we grew anywhere near 5%. In agriculture, and then that's the sector that hires the bulk of our people. So if you're not even growing near, in fact, I can't remember when we've grown significantly over 3%. So if you have a population that is growing at 3% and your agricultural output is not even growing near that, then that signifies a problem. And that problem to me is a problem, well, a number of reasons. The one reason is security. A lot of our farmers, as we all know, are not out there farming. They're scared going to their farms. They have security issues. But one big reason also is that people are pivoted from that activity to something else because they see the lights in the urban centers and they're going there to try to partake of this thing that's coming from crude oil. So the young guys coming out of our universities are not trying to go there, go to the farms, to go to rural areas with their parents to do farming. And so what we need to do is to find a way to invest in people so that they can go and do a bit of mechanized type farming, a bit of more up-to-date type of farming so we can compete with the farmers in other countries. In other countries, you have a very small proportion of the population in farming, but they are churning out huge amounts of farm products and selling some to us because it's much cheaper to buy from them than to buy from our own people. So I think that we have to look at farming very critically. That means to look at it, it means you need to look at the guys who are producing the farm produce, their security and their ability to be globally competitive. I don't think that we have that ability right now. And nobody would argue because we look at the evidence. The evidence shows that we are not competitive. If you can even grow agricultural output over 3%, we want that to be 7%, 8%. If you can't do that, it suggests that there is a problem. And what is the problem? The problem is with the tools and the human resources that are involved. So I think our ministries across board have to look at that. And this is another area where we're not very focused. We're not as focused as I would like us to be. I think that there is a sort of that we don't have the synergy that we should have. There's a dislocation of activities that between the states, the local, and the federal. So there's not much complementarity. So the federal government should be a little bit more catalytic in pushing state governments to do more, and the state government should free local governments to do a bit more. I see some states are doing much better than others in terms of the freedom that they give to local governments to be able to be on their own and cause their people to go out and work. So if we're looking for a way out, the country is made up of the 774 local governments that we have. So what happens in those local governments is what happens in Nigeria. So Nigeria as a whole is an aggregation of these local governments. So what I would like to see is a situation, and I've said this before, where we begin to look at setting up corporations in each local government. So a local government has a local government development corporation. It's a company. And that company looks to how to produce from that local government. And that company looks to how to export from that local government. But that is catalytically driven from the center, from Abuja. So we set the tone and we say, we're going to open up space. And we're going to go out there and try to look for markets for you, for whatever you produce. In West Africa, we talk about the president just talked about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Well, if you open up borders and you don't have things to sell, then what good is it? Then you just become a dumping ground. Because in the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, every single country is looking at Nigeria as the market to go to. So that's where they're coming. That means our folks have to be extremely globally competitive.
And you're becoming even more hostile to, accepting our people in their own countries. Look at what's happening in Ghana, for instance.
Absolutely.
To even say, okay, maybe the factors of production are a little, cheaper or, easier in Ghana. Let's go to Ghana and produce. It's a problem. I'm wondering, though, it would seem that for every solution that you find, Nigeria has a unique perspective to the problem. Let me give you an instance. You talked about security, being a challenge, which is a fact. You talked about 774,000 jobs or 774 local governments.
Yes.
We know that not all 774 local governments are functioning as local governments. There are local governments that have been overrun by bandits. There are local governments that have been overrun by Boko Haram. There are local governments that are only existent in name because the people only go there to, share whatever allocation is given at the end of the month, and that's that. So sometimes, and then there are the local governments, there are some states, for instance, towards the end of last year, the rains last year wreaked havoc on their agricultural produce. And I don't know how the farmers from those areas have recovered so far. How do you then go back to say, hey, look, this is what we're thinking now. We will still encourage you to go into agriculture. Do you think that we've sent that signal strongly enough for people to have confidence to say that whatever happens, my effort will not go to waste. I will definitely reap something at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Well, the thing is this. Obviously, not every local government is adversely impacted, by insecurity. So we have some others that are not, but a good number of them, especially in the northern part of the country, have serious insecurity problems with bandits, Boko Haram, and all of that. And I think that for those people, and this is where I'm very proud of the efforts of some of the governors of the northern part of the country, that the current governors are doing, in my estimation, much better than the governors of before. I mean, look at Kaduna, Sokoto, Bauchi, in Katsina, in terms of their pushing literacy measures. You have to be able to read and write in a global language of commerce to be able to be globally competitive. So when you have states where the literacy rate is like 30-something%, 40-something%, you cannot be globally competitive that way. We just have to say it exactly as it is. You compare with Lagos, where the literacy rate is in the 90s, even Bayelsa Rivers, very high literacy rates. So if you want to have activity, even if you're displaced by Boko Haram, then you can move to Lagos, then you can go to Port Harcourt, then you can go to Abuja and get into fintech activities and get into computer software activities. You get into graphics production. But if you don't have good literacy, that's going to be difficult. Then you are stuck. Your choices are limited. So that's the point I keep making, that we have to look at our most important asset is the human asset. And that's when I talked about economic geography. I was saying, well, we look at the crops that we produce across the country. Then we look at the politics that will influence the allocation of the revenues from our natural resources. And then we get quagmired at the National Assembly and in the presidency on how to handle that. But what we should be looking at is the human being. How do we train the human being so that a guy from Sokoto can easily go to Lagos or to Port Harcourt or to Onitsha or to Kaduna and perform just as well as anybody else? And they can even, and then we also have to look at partnerships among states. And, so one state, and I keep saying this, Katsina State brings the cow, River State does meat packing. Okay, so they're working together, kind of like the relationship we have now between Kebbi and Lagos. So it shows these kinds of things can happen. We need to develop, so we can't just be looking at every time we gather, we recite the GDP numbers, we recite inflation numbers, we talk about stagflation. But the problem is, you got to get to the root of it. The root of it is with the persons. That's what the problem is. If you look at the countries that are successful, that's what they've done. If you look at economic freedom, there's this ranking of this economic freedom index. We are, I believe, number 116. That's not that bad. We're about number 8, number 9 in Africa. Not that bad, but we could be number 50-something. We could be close to where Mauritius is or Botswana. I mention that because I think that the federal government, especially, has to open up more space. Even in the petroleum industry, we need to have more activity as our people get more computer literate, as they get more inclined to ICT and can handle some of these capital-intensive activities. We need to create space for them so that they can do it. But I think that the government crowds out the working population in many ways. We have a government that is fat, and that fatness affects our being able to be nimble, our agility. So our economic agility is hampered by our weight. So we got to be able to do something about it government-wise. The government is not as nimble as the private sector. We have to understand that. So if we are going, the whole thing boils down to production, however you look at it. If you look at the exchange rate, you talk about stagflation. Stagflation is worsened by the exchange rate because, first of all, you don't have a job. They have high prices. It really hurts you. We have food prices now near 20%. The latest report, the headline number is about 15.8%, to be precise, 15.75. I don't like to be that precise. But so a little over 15% year over year in December. That's headline number. But the food inflation is near 20%. You can't keep doing that and then people succeed. So to buy stuff from here is expensive. To buy it from overseas is even very expensive because of the exchange rate. Most people are dealing at the parallel market. Even if you went to the so-called official rate, it's near 400 compared to how it used to be. Have incomes risen that fast to meet up with that kind of drastic change, that phenomenal change we've seen in the exchange rate? And also in inflation. So these are the things that are causing the misery that people are facing. The question is then, how do you get out of it? How you get out of it, and we have to say it, and I keep talking about it, but that's what my company does, is to look at the human capital development the issues that we face. We've got to be able to invest in our people and start early. And don't worry about it, let me do it during my 4-year term. You just start it. And over 8 years, 10 years, 20 years, we will see a dramatic difference.
Let's go to Lagos now. Ayo has a question for you.
Yes, Mokwe, thank you. Prof, talking about the human capital development, as you just mentioned now, I find it interesting, especially because, as you well know, Nigeria as a developing country would have something in the region of 70 to 80% of its economy relying on the small and medium enterprises. Talking about capacity, looking at the figures that we have now, we clearly have a deficit of capacity. To grow the economy, we have to grow that sector. What do we need to do?
Yes, Ayo. Well, that's the point. I mean, you answered the question in a way because you focus on human capital development. I think that's what it is. We need to look at the human beings. When we talk about economic growth, in reality, I know that people are looking at the change in output, but in reality, we're looking at the change in the factors of production. So you say, okay, what are the factors that are producing these goods and services that we talk about? And I'm saying that the most important factor is human capital in the labor and in the entrepreneurship and the other things that are involved.
The question,
the management of
pardon me, Prof. The question then is, what is the shortfall? My apologies. What is the shortfall in that sector? What is it that they need for us to be able to grow? What are the deficits? What are the gaps that we need to fill for us to be able to grow that sector?
Well, good. Well, what we can do right away is what I call tax-specific human capital development. So we go to, you don't have to wait to send somebody to school and let them take 20-something years to get a PhD. But you can go to a task and say, what do I need to produce this particular good? Maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 6 months, and we give the training for that. And that's the reason I said that we got to go to the local government. The federal government cannot do it all. I'm telling you, they cannot do it. They want to pretend they can do it, but they cannot do it. And they make matters worse for themselves in pretending that they can do it. The federal government should be just more catalytic. Cause the states to do it and let the states free the local government. That's why we have the local government chairman. That's why we have them. Let the local government chairman get together with the people in their community and say, what skills do we need in order to be able to handle outsourcing opportunities for the United States or the UK? Then that local government will be able to do it. We've got people, Nigerians in the diaspora, some now occupying even very significant positions, as we can see, even in the incoming Biden administration. But we have other Nigerians in the diaspora that we can partner with. The idea of partnership is also crucial. The criticality of it cannot be overemphasized. So I think that we're to partner with people if we're looking for short fixes and bridging that gap that you talk about. Well, that gap would be bridged when we have people given the skills so that they can mobilize the resources, like I said, tax-specific human capital development. Yes, it's good to go to school. It's good to go study coding, which is extremely important at the early stages of primary school, secondary school. All our kids ought to be studying coding so that they can compete with the Koreans and the Taiwanese and the Americans and all of that. But you also have people that can be given, there used to be something called adult education, where we can also do adult education with computer skills. It can be done. Telling them this is how you produce this, and if you want to, you can get partners from outside. And now there are many Nigerians that are well qualified that are outside that can come and partner with you. And so I think we can do that.
Well, Prof, I do hope that there are people, policymakers and people who mean well for the country, who are racking their head day and night to see how we can get out of where we are now economically listening to you, and I hope that the takeaways that they have been able to, take out will be solid. I mean, definitely journalists like myself have more questions to ask of policymakers who should be thinking in this direction. We have to thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. Professor Magno Pakol is Executive Chairman, Economic Growth and Development Center, is a former Chief Economic Advisor to the President and CEO, National Planning Commission, and also a former Professor of Economics at the University of Dallas in the United States. Thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning. Well, that's it for this segment. We will definitely not leave without your comments. Over and out to you, Chamberlain.
Well, yes, indeed. We'll start with this one from Dr. Ikpemosa, who is talking about Nigerian economy. Says we can actually make very good use of our resources through efficient and effective use of local governments in rural areas.
Absolutely. Daily Concept says about school reopening is the largest cohort of people. Focusing on implementing a plan and to execute it strategically, schools should be operating on 75% online and 25% on premises in different phases so as to easily infuse them into the academic sessions.
Well, Etim Okon says the position, that's talking about school resumption, the position of the House committee member is not supported because this 3 months he's requesting should have been taken all of this while. We don't trust another 3 months to put things in place. If schools should be closed, markets should be closed.
We also have this from Emmanuel Oche about schools as well. Says National Assembly should do an oversight function to see if schools are ready to resume or not.
Still on the matter, Ismail Owolabi says we have to be realistic. It doesn't matter how many months we give to schools. Many schools will never be fully ready to comply with the protocols. An African solution for an African problem, which is trusting our immunity, which is what's kept us safe so far.
Oh boy.
And Ayodeji Ogunwale says, talking about contracting COVID-19, I was under the impression that a child can contract the virus and not show symptoms, yet go home and transfer to parents. So how does this resumption make sense?
Well, resumption doesn't necessarily mean everybody's got to be in school. There could be online schooling, there could be different measures that could be adopted. So the thing is, what are the authorities going to do about it? Because if they say don't resume, what's the alternative? Because there has to be something about all of this, as we see in other areas. So I guess it's something that will continue as we progress. Today as well, we'll see if the schools, who's back and who's not. And what will the federal government do? What will PTF say next? I guess we'll look out for all of those. Well, thank you all for watching and for your comments. We'll see you again tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain Uso.
I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful day.
And I'm Maupe Ogunyuso. Thank you for watching.